What's up, everyone? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stochastic channel. Today, we're talking the College Football Week 7 main slate for DFS. Monster slate again, so we'll get right into it. But first, make sure to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. If you've done that, thank you. It helps us a ton. Just want to say that first and foremost. We're also brought to you by Bet365, and they have a deal for those of you in Kentucky, Ohio, New Jersey, Virginia, Iowa, Colorado, Louisiana, Indiana, Arizona, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. What you'll do is click the link below, make your first deposit. $5 wager on any game could be a side or a total. Whether it wins or loses, you're going to be turning that $5 into $200 in bonus bets. You must be 21 or older to play, 18 in Kentucky. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, we'll save some time and dive right into this. This is our data usage tool over on Stochastic. All of our tools, data, projections, ownership, sins, it's all available in the link below. Seen a lot of success, a lot of screenshots, a lot of shout outs on Twitter. If you've done that, thank you and congratulations. You guys put in the work, and I'm glad the tools are helping. Just good to see that everyone is having some pretty good success with it this year. And hopefully this video helps. I realize this must just be a time of day thing where my lights do not seem to be cooperating with, I don't know, the natural lighting in this apartment. But let's dive in. It's a 12-game main slate. On DraftKings, we'll, of course, add the FanDuel games at the end. There's a lot of injuries. A big wrinkle we're seeing this time of year is late news is becoming more impactful. And if you haven't noticed, the SEC reports, the injury reports, they're not required to be accurate. And eventually one of these teams is going to have a late news situation to a main player. Last week, we saw Virginia, who luckily was not a team a lot of people were really targeting, but they had a bunch of guys ruled out last second. It's coming. I just don't know what team and I don't know when, but it is coming. All right, kicking things off, we have South Carolina taking on Bama. It's a 21.5-point spread. Bama's taking some money, 50.5 total. It's been parked there for a while. Pace is pretty good. South Carolina's 56th in seconds per play. Bama is 76th. The pass rates are low for both these teams. South Carolina prefers to run, only a 38% pass. They're not going to be able to do that here. Bama, 43% pass. They can do whatever they want. Lenore Sellers is 5,400. This is a semi-intriguing price tag, but it's a tough matchup up front. Bama's strength is their front seven, and South Carolina has a terrible offensive line. I mean, they're starting some really bad transfers from the FCS and the G5, and they have a freshman left tackle. So it's pretty tough sledding for South Carolina. Sellers needs to run because the volume is just low from a passing perspective. And he hasn't exactly been very efficient through the air. So they're actually doing a good job pricing these bad QBs or these QBs in tough matchups. So I won't rule him out. If I get some of him, I'll probably leave it, but he's definitely not a target. The backfield is becoming more of a committee, and Raheem Sanders has just been so inefficient, and he did get hurt in a game, so perhaps he's still dealing with something. But anyway, it's been so bad that we saw Oscar Attaway, Juju McDowell, Jarwan Howell all play a little bit. They did get slaughtered by Ole Miss in a game that should have been worse than it was, box score-wise, margin of victory-wise, but I'm concerned with Raheem Sanders at this point. Negative game script. He's not a good pass catcher. And now you have the threat of Attaway, McDowell, and Howell, whether it's injury or something else. He just doesn't have the same role he once did. Receiving core for South Carolina became a little thinner when Jared Brown got ruled out. I still don't think this is worth really talking about. Mazio Bennett's playing a lot more. Larvadain did jump into a full-time snap share. And then, of course, you have Simon playing the tight end. He's virtually an every down player, but it's just very lackluster, and this all stems top down from the pass game. Do you really want to be holding a South Carolina player? It'd have to be like the stone minimum for me to really consider, but the route leaders last week, Simon 75, Mazio 84, Larvadain 75, everyone else rotating. Sad we can't get Nick Harbor to learn the game of football, but is what it is. The age-old question, do we play Jalen Milroe or do we not play Jalen Milroe? He's priced out of it a little bit for me. Bama still is a good team, total of 36. This guy's dynamic on the ground. He should have more rushing yards, but he's had a number of long runs called back via penalty. It's not so much a problem anymore now that Keaton Proctor's back, but he's still explosive through the air. If you find yourself with the salary to get to Milroe, I'm never going to fault you. It's just a little tough on this slate unless we get some late news, but he's always going to be a good play. South Carolina's run hot on defense via turnovers. I think they've shown some cracks in recent games. The backfield's pretty messy. It's a two-way committee. And part of the problem here is they've been so explosive through the pass game that it's limited their play calling. So they don't have a lot of raw plays, and they're not super fast to begin with. But they'll get a couple carries off, and then they just get a pass game explosive. So we haven't seen a lot of red zone opportunities from Jam Miller or Haynes, and we haven't seen them get a lot of carries because they're getting a ton of these big plays through the air. I think they're pretty dicey, but you could always buy low on them. There's going to be better plays. It's just the best way to put this. And plus, Milroe is such a factor in the run game. He takes away a lot. In the receiving game, we do have some injuries to watch. Kobe Prentice and Kendrick Law are injured. Those are rotational receivers. The two main guys you're focusing on are Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard. With Williams, you're paying for the explosiveness. None of them have great target numbers. It's just a low volume offense from an opportunity perspective, but it is explosive. So if you find yourself to a Williams Milroe stack, I wouldn't hate it. It's just super expensive. Bernard is a lot more feasible in those kind of lineups. He lacks the explosiveness, but his target share is right there with Ryan Williams. I don't have a ton of interest in the rotational receivers. I think it would take both Law and Prentice being out for me to consider someone else. Cole Adams is probably the guy you'd look at. He only has a 44% route share. That was in their last game. But he was a player that was hurt to start the year, and he seems to be ascending. Maybe you throw a dart, but it's pretty dicey. Dipree is about 60% of the routes. He splits with Josh Cuevas, so that's pretty dicey as well. Let's go to our second game, Clemson, Wake Forest, another potential blowout. It's a 20.5 point spread, a 62 total, much better than the previous game. Klubnik, 9K is fairly affordable. He's been running well this year, and perhaps I discounted his rushing ability. He did have a sprained ankle that he injured very early last year that he had to deal with all through the season. Really hampered him on the ground. He's showing explosiveness. I struggle with this because the ACC is weak. It's not like it's getting any better because he's another weak opponent on deck. O-line's been good for Klubnik. His efficiency through the air is good. The young receivers he's been throwing to have been able to get the job done. He's a decent play. I would prefer going elsewhere. Maybe this is just my own bias. Certainly not on FanDuel where he's very expensive. Maffa continues to be very cheap, and we've seen in competitive games he does have the carry ceiling. He exited their second most recent game with an injury, so it's kind of just been the worst run out possible for Maffa volume-wise. And he still somehow is averaging 99 rushing yards per game. He's a pretty good pass catcher. His route share is fine, 50%, and that's with all the limitations he's seen, blowouts, injuries, whatever it may be. Maffa, he might be like close to the first guy in my lineups, my low-risk stuff. I'm not playing cash, but I mean, he out-carried all the other backs 25-1 last game. Receiving room, the real nuances to mention are Tyler Brown's been limited because of injury, and then Adam Randall, he had a stress fracture in his foot or something like that. So they're kind of wild cards, and we're not sure where their routes are going to come in. If they play more, it would come at the expense of really everyone else. And they're deeper now because of what they were able to do recruiting, bringing in Wesco and more. So this is a better Clemson offense than we've seen recently. Antonio Williams had a 79% route share. Jake Brenningstool had a 79% route share. He's the most insulated. Wesco was at 60%, and then Troy Stellato was at 61%. So that's kind of your top-end players. TJ Moore, his routes dropped back down to 24%. Cole Turner was at 39%, and then I'm worried that Tyler Brown and Randall get more involved. So I think the best players to look at are Brenningstool if you want to go there. Just playing tight end, he's the safest. He's also the cheapest of these players that are main contributors. But then Williams and Bryant Wesco are not super expensive. Cole Turner would be fourth on this list for me. Wake Forest, Hank Bachmeier is a little too expensive for my liking. This is a guy that historically finishes with negative rushing yards, so I'm not buying into the 95 on the ground here, especially against Clemson. He's more likely to just be neutral on the ground, which means he needs to get it done through the air. Fortunately, Wake Forest is 11th in pace, and they have a 55% pass rate. Still, you're facing Clemson. It's not going to be easy sledding for Bachmeier, so it's very difficult to get to him. The backfield continues to ping pong in usage. This is a pure hot hand team. Damon Claiborne, the second you buy into him, he goes down to like single-digit carries, but he did out-carry Tate Carney 20-1 in their last game. Couldn't find an injury on Carney. I think this was literally a hot hand type situation. I'm not playing them against Clemson in severe negative game script. The receiving room is a bit more interesting. Donovan Green's not going to play in this game, and Walker Merrill is out as well, which semi-condenses things. But honestly, they've just kind of dug into more bodies rather than condensed routes for a player like Taylor Morin, which was a big surprise. Morin still only had 58% of the routes in their last game with all the injuries. His season high is 64%. So I'm not sure there's more on the bone for Morin. He's a bit dicey. Horatio Fields did see a big spike. He was up to 79% of the routes. And then Micah Mays took over, which was a surprise. I believe he's a former 4-star. Someone can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. This is just going off memory. But I remember his recruiting days, and I remember he had some hype. So Micah Morris could be a name to mention. He had 7 targets in their most recent game, which is very good. He's the stone minimum. That I don't hate. So if you're running it back with this team, Morin, Horatio Fields, and Micah Mays are the names that I would throw out there. Georgia Tech takes on North Carolina. It's a 3.5-point spread in favor of Georgia Tech. North Carolina keeps taking money. The total is 60 points, so very, very good. Georgia Tech's playing a little slower this year. They're 96th in pace with a 45.5% pass rate. North Carolina plays fast. This is characteristic of them. 20th in pace, a 50% pass rate. Haynes King could be coaxed into more of a shootout if North Carolina keeps this close. And bettors seem to think that's the case because they keep pounding North Carolina. We've seen it multiple times this year. If Georgia Tech gets to a lead, they're going to slow the game to a snail's pace and ride that run game. So Haynes King does come with some volatility. They also pull him on the goal line for QB sneak stuff. They'll use Zach Pyron for that. So he's far from risk-free, and now his price is up a little bit. North Carolina's defense is horrifying, though. They're allowing nearly 9 yards per attempt. They give up 70 points to James Madison, some of that on special teams and defense. But the matchup is still going to be nice. And Haynes King does have good mobility, 246 yards on the ground. He's going to give you somewhere to 40 to 50 yards per game as long as this is competitive. In the backfield, Jamal Haynes off the fumble game. They went right back to him and gave him 19 carries. They also don't have Trelane Maddox. I hope I'm saying that right. Sorry, Mr. Maddox, if I'm not. But rather than just feed Jamal Haynes more, they did bring Chad Alexander back, who was involved early in the season. He had 10 carries to Haynes' 19. So this is going to be a 60-30 split or 70-30 split, somewhere in that range. Haynes won't handle everything, but he'll be the favorite for touches. He's a good GPP play because of this defense on the other side. North Carolina did get back K'Mon Rucker, their best defensive lineman on the edge, so that's at least worth noting. But still very interested in Haynes for tournaments. The receiving game is cut and dry. I think you just want to play Rutherford and Singleton. They're no longer at their sub 5K price tags, but everything's flowing through them. They're the only players with a target share north of 10%. Everyone else, 9.5 or below. Rutherford's at 26.5. Singleton's at 23. Rutherford's played a lot more this year than Singleton, which is a surprise because Singleton led the team last year. But I think it's very easy to target both of those players. And I'm not really looking anywhere else because they're just not involving anyone else. If you did, it would be Chase Lane. He did have a 94% route share. Only one target, basically a wind sprinter out on the field. No one outside of Jamal Haynes, Singleton, or Rutherford had more than 2 targets in their last game. It's pretty dicey. North Carolina, Criswell, I thought would be more mobile. He showed flashes when he was a situational player at previous stops. But since he's been playing full-time QB, the sacks have added up for him. Hasn't shown a lot of mobility. He's not an efficient passer, but volume is always going to be there for him because of the pace and the pass rate. He's just too expensive. I would rather find the 500 to get to Haynes King or find other options. Omarion Hampton saw a price hike to 8,900. You could argue it's still not enough. He still outcarried Davion Grouse 23-6, averaging 127 yards per game. I think he's a fine pay-up option. Bryson Nesbitt is really interesting to me at 3,500. He has at least 8 targets in 3 straight games. He now leads the team in target share, and he's second on the team in receiving yards. That's only behind J.J. Jones. J.J. Jones plays a lot. He's a pretty vanilla player, in my opinion. I was very surprised they were relying on him as the number 1 receiver, and I think those days might be coming to an end soon because we finally saw Nate McCullum in a full-time role or close to it. McCullum was hurt to start the year. He's been hurt a lot. He was hurt a lot last year, but when he played, he had a monstrous target share. This was the first game he was above 39% of the routes. He was at 68, and he saw 13 targets in the pass game. I think this is somewhat sticky because of the role we saw McCullum play previously with this team. I think their main 3 wide receiver sets are going to be J.J. Jones, Nate McCullum, and then Kobe Pacer had a 96% route share. Bryson Nesbitt has been bouncing all over the place. He's been in the mid-50s, as high as 75, but he is very involved when he's on the field. He plays tight end. He just is a little limited because he doesn't block a lot. They'll use guys like Copenhaver in those situations. So I think it's pretty clear cut. I want the top three: McCollum, Nesbitt, or J.J. Jones. You could throw a dart on Pacer, but honestly, I don't know why you're doing that when you can save 200 and play McCollum. Washington, Iowa, pretty easy game, 42 total, so you don't want a lot of pieces here. 2.5-point spread in favor of Iowa. Will Rogers is cheap enough to at least mention. He takes too many sacks, and he largely needs 300-yard bonuses to pay off his salary because, first of all, they'll use Damon Williams in clear rushing situations. Then he doesn't have the Mike Leach volume, so he's just far less likely to hit 300 yards than he was in previous editions of his career. Also, playing Iowa is no easy feat, so I'm pretty out on Washington. Plus, these teams are slow. It's not just the good top 25 defenses on both sides. Washington's 85th in pace. Iowa's 112th. Jonah Coleman is still a decent play. He's 6,300. That's enticing enough for me to leave him in my GPP pool. He's averaging 17.7 touches per game, 100 yards on the ground. He's a good pass catcher. I will say he's been sharing that role with Cameron Davis more than I would like of late. They've basically been split into like 30% of the routes apiece. It's just not as good of a floor as we saw early in the year for Coleman. So he is a bit dicey. I'm still going to leave him in my pool. He's completely fine. Top two receivers, Denzel Boston, Giles Jackson. Boston is very expensive for my liking in this matchup, but he is averaging 82 yards per game on a 28% target share. Giles Jackson not far behind at 25%. He projects extremely well in this spot too. Jackson, he's only 13 yards behind Boston on the year. So I think you could play either of them in tournaments. I would look more at Jackson for price. Jeremiah Hunter starting to see his routes cut for Rashid Williams. It's still like 70 to 30%, but Hunter's not the locked-in play that I thought he was going to be when he transferred into this offense. Kaleki Latu is somewhat involved, 3,100. You could click his name. He's a tight end, and he's not an explosive one. He's just to catch the ball around the line of scrimmage, immediately fall down. He's going to need like 8 targets, even at 3,100. Cade McNamara is unplayable, as is every single Iowa pass catcher. They're not using Luke Lachey. Talk about indictment on your offense. The real question with Iowa is, can you play Caleb Johnson? I think you absolutely can. We saw his volume diminished against Ohio State. It's just they didn't get off as many plays, so that's what happens, and they passed the ball more. But it's either Caleb Johnson or pass. I tend to think we pass. We just saw Washington do a good job against Monangai, and they should come in with the same game plan against this entirely inept Iowa offense. Speak of the devil, and he shall appear. We have Wisconsin taking on Rutgers. Another low 40 total. This one's climbing, though. It's at 43.5. It's been taking money towards the over. Wisconsin, 1.5-point underdog in this spot. They've slowed their pace. They've lowered their pass rate since they've switched from Tyler Van Dyke to Braden Locke. And I shouldn't say switch. Van Dyke tore his ACL. It is what it is. Locke can't run. He has no designed attempts, no scrambles, and 2 sacks. So he's done a good job mitigating pressure, but he's not live for anything positive. If he gets any rushing yards, they're always going to be in the negative. You can't play him in this matchup. You can play Tawi Walker. We did see Darian Dupree play a decent amount early in that game, but when everything was on the line and they were in high-value situations around the goal line, it was Tawi Walker who was out there handling most of the work. He also has the better route share. It's pretty split between him and Dupree. Yakimelli also comes in on occasion, so it's far from a full-time role, but it's Tawi or pass, and he's still fine to play. Rutgers' main weakness on defense is their run defense. They're allowing 5.2 yards per carry, and they've been had multiple times this year. So you can still play Tawi, even though it's a very bad game. This is a late news situation. You'll have to watch the Big Ten injury report. I don't think Bryson Green is going to play, and Will Pauling is dicey for this game. Pauling had an 18% route rate last game because of injury. He was moving around on the sidelines. Bryson Green was not, so I have more faith that Will Pauling plays than Bryson Green. Big situation to monitor. It's going to be a rotation unless they're both out, because we've seen a big route spike for Trech Kekahuna. CJ Williams already plays a lot, and Vinny Anthony's been earning more routes, even with Pauling and Green healthy. So I think we're probably looking at best a pretty gnarly 4-way wide receiver rotation, and I don't really feel good about any of their routes, to be honest with you. I think any of them could be cannibalized. It's not like we've had a guy really break out here. Vinny Anthony is a burner downfield, so he's always going to have his role. Kekahuna has been in and out of the slot. He had a great game last week, so perhaps he's earned his way on the field. And honestly, CJ Williams is probably the guy that should be benched. He's just a wind sprinter, and he's never lived up to his 4-star recruiting profile. If I were making a bet, assuming Pauling is healthy, it would be for CJ Williams to leave the lineup at the benefit of Kakahuna and Anthony. I don't really know why you're putting Williams on the field at this point. He just stinks. Rutgers, you're not playing Kaliakmanis. That's almost a certainty. Their volume is super low, 42% pass, 98th in pace. He can't run. There's just nothing to like about Kaliakmanis. There is absolutely no ceiling. Thought it would be better. It's not. Sometimes you're wrong. Kalamanangai still has a monstrous workload. They were just severely depressed in terms of what they were allowed to do play volume-wise last week. He still had 19 carries. He's averaging 133 yards on the ground. They do not throw to running backs at all, really. They have 6 combined targets all year. No, 6 combined targets all year. So Manangai needs to get there on the ground. He's expensive. Wisconsin's defense isn't great, but I mean, this is far from an ideal offense for Manangai to be playing in. And then the receiving game is so inept. I don't know how you trust anyone. And plus, it's really volatile. Chris Long had 9 targets in the last game. The only one who's over 200 yards is Demir Miller, but even his target share has come down in recent weeks. He hasn't been above 5 in 2 straight games. At 4,300, you can just find much better options. I'd rather gamble on all of the Wisconsin guys than play any of the Rutgers pass catchers. The only redeeming quality to Wisconsin's pass catchers is they're all cheap, but we're not really going to know how they project until we get some injury news on that situation. Red River, Texas plays Oklahoma. As usual, they moved the time of this game, I was made aware. It's got to be money related, probably just trying to maximize the TV windows for all these games. And I'm guessing this would have interfered with Big Noon, which networks didn't want. Anyway, Texas is a 14-point favorite. This is almost certainly going to move. I'm seeing Texas 14s minus 125. Expect this to go north of this before kickoff. 48.5 total. That's plummeting. All of that's on the Oklahoma side, and it's all injury related. We'll get there. Quinn Ewers is expected back. This is worse for DFS because he can't run. Arch at least was doing that. He's too expensive for my liking. The team total is not high enough because it's not really a live dance partner on the other side in Oklahoma. And they do have a pretty good defense. I will say they're down 2 starters in their secondary, and they have shown cracks in the pass game since those players went down, Doby and Williams. So there is a path via explosiveness and efficiency for Ewers, but at 9.9K, he's going to need it to get there. And he hasn't always shown it. I mean, there's a couple of interesting wrinkles. Some of them are just how much do they play their skill position players. Maybe that's a path for his success, but we'll get into that part. In the backfield, I'm truly not sure what they do. They punished Jaden Blue for fumbling again, 6 carries. And I mean, they weren't playing a competent opponent, so they could afford to do that. If it was a tight game, would they have gone back to Jaden Blue? I truly am not sure because the game prior, albeit Wisner didn't play, but Blue had 25 carries. Now they're looking at a backfield comprised of Blue, Wisner, and Gibson. I think it's going to be Blue at the lead, but I think there's a chance you see more Wisner and Gibson than you'd like. Just not sure what the trust is now that Blue has lost multiple fumbles this year. And he just straight up got punished. He's a tough click at 7,500 because of it. Plus, Oklahoma's pretty good up front. Not a good matchup. Only allowing 2.6 yards per carry, in fact. The best path is through the air. We mentioned that. All these routes you see here, Isaiah Bond, 68%, Matthew Golden, 66%, Gunnar Helm, even at tight end, 61%. I think there's a chance they hyper-consolidate this, a chance. I don't think it's going to be anything like 100% or 95%, but I do think there is a chance we see a spike for Bond and Golden in particular because they've played mostly incompetent teams. Even Michigan wasn't live in the game they played. And that's depressed their target shares, their route shares, their overall output. Bond is potentially a first-round draft pick in the NFL this year. He's super explosive. He would be averaging probably close to 100 yards per game if they would let him play more, but they're really deep at receiver. I don't blame them for doing this. Matthew Golden, a little less explosive, but there's a chance his routes rise quite a bit. In fact, I don't know who they would prefer to play at wide receiver 3. This might just be a spot they choose to rotate more to appease everyone in the offense. The main components I think you look at are Ryan Wingo. His route share was 37% last game. DeAndre Moore, he was at 54%. Those are the 2 guys most likely to be out there. Jonte Cook had his routes cut to 11%, which is a problem, and Silas Bolden's just straight up not playing. At tight end, Garner Helm has perhaps the safest role in the entire offense. It's a non-explosive role that probably is dependent on touchdowns. But one of the big squares that would have been missed on my bingo card is Amari Niblack. No snaps. No targets in the last 4 games. Who would have thought? Not me. But Gunnar Helm, 3,700. You can include him in stacks. To sum it up, I'm okay with Bond. Golden is a great price. Helm is fine. Wingo and Jonte Cook also fine at their sub 4K price tags. I'll be clicking on them all. Oklahoma has been very different since they went to Hawkins. They've slowed their pace extremely. So this 22 you see here, they were 6 seconds slower in Hawkins' first start. 6 seconds. They went from 24 seconds per play to 30. They went from a 47% pass rate to 37. They just neutered this offense. And they're playing Texas, who is a great defense on paper. They also have played really weak opponents on the other side of the ball. Like, their defense hasn't been tested. But, I mean, it's still a good defense regardless. We thought it was good coming into the year. So this is far from a clean-cut matchup for Hawkins. All his skill position players are still out. No Burks. No, I mean, they're all way down the list now. No Burks, no Andrew Anthony, no Jaleel Farouk, no Dink Anderson. The best receiver they have right now is probably Bauer Sharp at tight end. Brennan Thompson is running a lot of routes. They're also not throwing, so I'm not sure you can click on any of these guys anyway. If you want the route shares, Bauer Sharp should play the most. Brennan Thompson, 80%. Jaquez Petaway, 70. J.J. Hester, 60. Reagan's cleaned up the rest. It's just a complete mess. Luckily, Hawkins can run. I still don't think he runs enough to pay off 7,200. The backfield is interesting because now you get Taylor Tatum back from injury. He was explosive in his first real action, and now he's back. So what does this timeshare look like? The first thing we know almost definitively is that Gavin Sawchuk sucks and he's out of the rotation. Last week, Tatum didn't play, or last game, they had a bye. Last game, Tatum didn't play, so that allowed Barnes to have 18 carries. I think now you see this probably split 50-50. Can't get through a show without that happening. I'm sure you heard the sirens. If you didn't, that's why I paused. I'm not sure if my mic picked it up, but you live across the street from a fire department, that's what you get. Anyway, sum it all up, pretty much going to be an X out spot on Oklahoma outside of maybe a sprinkling of Barnes or Tatum. Cincinnati, UCF, great game here. 59 total, 3.5 point spread in favor of UCF. Cincinnati's playing slower. They're 99th in pace, still a 50% pass rate, and they have a hyper-efficient quarterback. UCF is 29th in pace with a 36% pass rate. Their offense has been largely inept. Sorsby's been awesome this year, man, and now he faces a UCF defense who has a weakness in the back end, allowing 8.1 yards per pass attempt. Cincinnati's doing that too, for the record. But Sorsby's been hyper-efficient, man. He's averaging 296 through the year. He's running a little bit, 66 yards. You can fire up Sorsby at this price, no questions asked. Corey Kiner is going to play in this game according to their coaching staff. Just double-check this. That's a huge boost for their offense because they had a bunch of guys injured. Chance Williams didn't play. Evan Pryor got hurt in the game. So I don't think you're going to have as many options behind Kiner. He might have like a 26-touch game here, which would be excellent at his price tag. Just make sure he's active. If he is, he's an awesome play. Their receivers were also really banged up in their last game. It doesn't matter a ton because you have a stud in Xavier Henderson, and he's not one of the injured guys. So he's live, of course. Aaron Turner and Tyron Smith were the two guys that missed their most recent contest. So without them, the routes did consolidate a little bit, which would put guys into play. Joe Royer's the tight end. His route share is very secure. You're likely looking at 80%. But then we saw Tony Johnson and Jamoy Mays jump up from about 50% of the routes. They both were at 94. So that would immediately become interesting if you get the right injury news in the situation. Again, that's Tony Johnson and Jamoy Mays. They both had 8 targets. Jamoy Mays is 3.3K. Again, watch Aaron Turner, watch Tyron Smith. We don't know on their statuses. UCF, it's been pretty alarming to see how much this offense is folded. KJ Jefferson has not progressed. He's still turning the ball over at a high rate, and he's hyper talented. It's crazy to watch him. You see the flashes, you see the mobility. 193 yards on the ground. You see some explosiveness through the air. It's just he can't string it together through a full game, and it's cost them. They got slaughtered by Colorado. He's somewhat in play, but man, this price tag is just a little too rich for my blood considering what he's put on the field. And it's not all his fault. What they have at receiver is negligent. Xavier Townsend hit the transfer portal. Now you have a bunch of dust complementing Kobe Hudson. It's going to be Trent Whitmore and Javaris Johnson. Neither of them are target earners. What opposing defenses have been able to do is park their best defender or dedicate extra resources to Kobe Hudson. And once you do that, the passing attack is erased. So you dedicate a couple extra resources to Kobe Hudson, you stack the box on RJ Harvey, and boom, you beat UCF. Cincinnati's defense is bad. I don't know if they have the personnel to execute this game plan, but they have a stud inside in Dante Corleone. Their secondary has been better than I thought. It's still not good. But yeah, just a lot of risk with UCF right now at the elevated price tags. Like, the best pass catcher is probably Randy Pittman at tight end, because I'm not paying $6,500 for Hudson. As the alpha, he's averaging 5.8 targets per game in competitive games. Like, I don't know what they're doing. RJ Harvey, he's 9,200. We've started to see them give more work to Penny Boone. That's a major concern. If there's going to be any sort of timeshare, you can't pay 9,200 for Harvey. Miles Montgomery's been out too. If he comes back, plus Johnny Richardson doesn't stack up the box score, but he plays on third downs. He plays in 2 minutes. He's the little scat back they use in those weird packages. I mean, there's risk everywhere with UCF, despite having a monster team total. This is a very tricky situation to navigate. If they come in super low owned, I'll likely boost them to try to get more as a piece of a good offense and a shootout. But if they come in at any sort of ownership, I might just flat out X this team. This is a sensitive game, and we will be watching ownership closely to see how to play it. Cal takes on Pitt, 58 total. Another good one here. Pitt, 3.5-point favorites. Could be a shootout. Cal is 48th in pace, 51% pass rate. Pitt is 4th in pace with a 56% pass rate. Cal's offense has been inept in a lot of games, so I'm not sure what to make of this. Mendoza is cheap enough where I think you could run some contrarian stacks, but you see his efficiency is pretty bad. 235 yards per game, only 36 on the ground. He's not shown much as a passer. And outside of the Miami game, this offense has been atrocious. In a game where Auburn had 5 turnovers, they put up 21 points. Just like complete ineptitude. Some of that is because they've had a lot of injuries. Jaden Ott cannot stay in a game. Like, I wish they would just sit him down and get him fully healthy, because it's a mess for their offense, and we don't know what to do for DFS. They're running Javian Thomas quite a bit in this offense now. I just don't know how healthy Ott is. He's super live to leave games injured. He's done it almost every single game this year. I believe he got injured in week 1. So I don't know. Pitt's defense is also better than we thought. It's not good, but it's not bad. In the receiving game, they just do not give any receivers a full workload, and it's tough because their top 2 receivers, at least on paper from the beginning of the year, have still yet to take a snap. That's Tobias Merriweather and Kyan Grays. Routes were semi-condensed, at least more than previously in their last game. Neziah Hunter, 60% of the routes. That was the season high. Corey Dykes, 77% of routes, season high. And then we had Mason Starling, 63% of the routes, season high. All those being season highs is very problematic for this team. They just are going to play 6 receivers, and there's nothing you can really do about it. I don't think there's much to be seen on Cal. Pitt, Holstein is 9,700. Man, I miss the days when he was parked around 7K, but it makes sense. This is an air raid offense. He's averaging 34 attempts per game, over 300 yards, and he has good mobility, 265. He's been a cheat code at previous prices. You can still play him because the game environment here is awesome. Cal's defense has been pretty good, especially against the pass. I think some of that is the signal colors they face, but we've seen them show cracks. Cam Ward lit them up in the last game, but Holstein contrarian stacks because of the price is fine to me. Des Reed did not cede a lot of work to Rodney Hammond, which is good to see, because if they don't use him, this offense might be dead in the water. They're actually really bad at run blocking. They're outside the top 100, but then you parlay that over to the yards after contact per attempt, forced missed tackles. Des Reed is near the top of the country in all those metrics. So it makes sense. He's been able to overcome a bad offensive line, and his pass catching role is so good. He had 11 targets in their last game. I mean, he's a stud, man. You can pay 94 for him if he's the stud you prefer to get to. We've already mentioned a couple cheap options you could use as dart throws to take that approach. Pass game, Kanata Mumfield, Raphael Williams are your 2 top options. It's not as condensed as you'd like, but Pitt somewhat makes up for that because of the raw volume. It's very good in this offense. So you get good target numbers even without good target shares. They use 4 receivers, but the guys that are on the field most are Mumfield, Williams, both should be above 80%. Then Kenny Johnson, 60% of the routes last game. Sincere Lee, 40%. Bartholomew's the main tight end. He's just not super involved. All of those names, I think, are semi-live in this game. I have most interest playing Raphael Williams at 4,400. He sort of hits that sweet spot of price projection and routes. Louisville takes on Virginia, 7-point spread in favor of Louisville, 54 total. Louisville's played much faster of late. They had one of the easiest schedules I've ever seen to begin the year, so they could just play neutered offense and beat their opponents. But now playing faster, 51% pass. Both defenses are bad. We've seen Louisville lose a lot of guys in their secondary, mostly to injury, but some to transfer. Shug has been awesome. He's still too cheap. He runs a little bit, and then he's averaging 289 yards per game through the air. Firing up Shug until they tell us no. The backfield's a mess. We still don't have Maurice Turner, but Isaac Brown and Don Chaney played in a virtual 50-50 committee, and Kewan Brown came in for a couple carries here and there. So it's pretty messy with Louisville. Chaney is 3,100. That's at least noteworthy. I will say Virginia's been better on defense than I thought, too. This team has been a surprise. I don't know if they're super live or anything, but they're definitely not a complete bottom feeder. Receiving game, they sort of condensed things even more. It was really just 3 wide receivers on the field most of the time. Of course, Ja'Cory Brooks, absolute stud. Play him if you have the salary. Chris Bell, I thought he would be more at risk, but 82.5% of the routes. And Colin Lacey, in his 2 games, he's been at 91% and 70%. I guess that drop is semi-concerning, as is the 4 targets. But I'm not really buying the Amari Huggins-Bruce game. He popped up for 6 targets. His routes were still really bad, 17.5%. Maybe the target per route rate is a sign of increased workloads to come, but I just am not buying it at this point. Tight end's a mess. I'll go right back to Lacey at 3,900. And man, was he bad in the last game. I don't know if it was his fault or if Shug's fault, but as you can see, it wasn't hyper condensed in the past game. Colin Dre at 7,900. There's just no way he should be more expensive than Shug. Contrarian Colin Dre is sure he runs a little bit, and then his volume is still pretty good. They're 24th in pace. They're more balanced than normal because they've quietly had a very efficient run game and a good offensive line, which has paved the way for them. This is not a good matchup for them in that regard. Louisville's strength on defense is their run defense and their pass rush. Their defensive line is pretty good, and their secondary is trash. So maybe you do get more volume for Colin Drea. Kobe Pace has kind of worked his way out of a committee. And Jack Greasy's been injured, so that's at least worth mentioning. But still, Pace, 19 carries in the last game, 2 targets, 21 touches. He's never been the most efficient player, but this is a pretty decent workload. Somewhat at risk of the timeshare because Brown and Greasy have played when they've been active. But it's getting a little better. I'm starting to consider Pace more. The receiving game, this is where we saw the late news last contest, and it's maybe more live today to monitor because they're in a better game environment. But right now, as it stands, we're looking at players that are out in Chris Tyree, and then a bunch of tight ends, Dakota Twitty, Gay, and Enos. And then we have guys that are questionable. It's mainly just Trell Harris because Harrison's already been out for so long. So that leaves a pretty messy situation for Virginia. The first thing you can say with confidence is that Malachi Fields is going to be the one no matter what they do. He's a little bit pricey, but you want to get to Fields, I have no real issues with it. He's averaging 8.4 targets per game. From there, the tight end injuries might sneak up on you, but Tyler Neville had an 86% route share. From there, the next player that was most active was Cameron Courtney, 80% of the routes. Andre Green and J.R. Wilson split that wide receiver 3 job. They were at 49% and 46% of the routes apiece. So to sum this up, I think it's pretty easy. Pay up for Malachi Fields if he's the guy you want to. Otherwise, Tyler Neville and Cameron Courtney are the 2 players you'd like to get most. This is all assuming Trell Harris misses again. We already know Tyree is out. Stanford, Notre Dame, a very weird inclusion on the main slate, 45.5 total in this game. Notre Dame, the favorite at 23 points. Stanford, disappointing year for them. Some people had expectations, myself included, but they failed. They already benched their quarterback. Ashton Daniels is gone now. Well, he's not gone. He's still there. But Justin Lamson is starting. And the big difference is Lamson is not as mobile, which is a problem because you kind of relied on that with Daniels to have any semblance of life. There's better players in this price range at quarterback than Lamson, so I'm not super interested. Notre Dame, they've had a good defense to start the year, but man, are they hurt. That'll probably be a bigger talking point in more competitive games, which Notre Dame seems to lack now that the Armed Force games seem to be the highlight of their schedule. Micah Ford is semi-breaking out of this backfield. Lamson carried the ball 13 times in the last game, so he will be a factor on the ground, even though he's not very good. But Ford, 11 carries. Chris Davis, 7. Former 4-star Cedric Alexander, 2. I think I would rather find like 200 to play Kobe Pace, but it's not an X-out spot for Ford. Unfortunately, the offense has been so bad that Alec Aomaner, our favorite stud out west, is only averaging 63.5 yards per game. His route share is still perfect. Target share is 34%. He's probably going to have a big game at some point, but man, is it tough with this offense having no QB. They did a weird thing, and they benched Tiger Bachmeier, not entirely, but his routes were basically cut to the bare minimum, and that was because they got Ismail Cisse and Emmett Mosley on the field for full-time routes. So don't play Bachmeier, but you could consider Mosley. You could consider Cisse. There's better options. They're both. I mean, who did this pricing? 4,400 and 4,500. Give me a break. Leonard's 8K. I mean, here's been the Riley Leonard experience. He has horrible days passing. His yards per attempt is like 5.9. He's terrible through the air. It's not all his fault. Notre Dame has awful receivers, and their O-line has been battered to oblivion. But Leonard is having a largely pedestrian game. He's failing at his price, and then some point in the second half, he breaks off a long run and just shoves it down my throat. He's probably going to do it again. He's 8K, so I mean, he's going to project reasonably because their team total is high, their run rate is high. He's super involved on the ground. He leads the team in rushing yards. But so many of these have come on broken plays. I just don't know if I have the stomach to keep fading Riley Leonard. We'll see, man. I don't know. He's going to project well again. So this is a decision for Saturday morning. I know my personal flaws, so I don't think I'm going to do anything drastic as I've been doing in weeks previously. I also don't know what Notre Dame's doing. This team is poorly organized, in my opinion, and I love Notre Dame. But they continue to give Jadarian Price work at the expense of Jeremiah Love. For what it's worth, perhaps they're realizing this. In their last game, we saw Love at 11 carries, Price at 3. Now, there's been some fumbling problems, and I think they're going to go right back to Price. So just a little nuance there. But Love comes out as a top 5 back in my model in terms of efficiency, and he doesn't have the workload. I don't have the answers. Part of the reason I don't think they're very well run is they have a bunch of terrible receivers. Somehow all the 4-stars they recruit flop. I don't know how this is possible. All of them. I mean, who is the last good receiver this team had? I don't know. Anyway, now maybe St. Brown? Equanimous? Anyway, this isn't a show about Equanimous. Bo Collins, the guy who couldn't stay on the field at Clemson, who, I mean, didn't exactly have a great receiving attack last year. He's leading your team in routes at 84% in their last game. Then it's been pretty nasty. Jaden Greathouse is in the mid-60s, 50s, even at times. The guy I really want to play is Mitch Evans, but they've just had the cap on his snaps because he's coming off the season-ending injury last year. Chris Mitchell's routes have been good, but somehow he has 0 targets on a great route, a full-time route share last week. He's just not involved. I mean, I have no explanation for what this team is doing, and they don't want to throw anyway. We've spent too much time here. I will move on. Penn State USC 3.5-point spread in favor of the road team. Penn State traveling across the country. 50.5 total. I think there's room for Penn State to maybe smash USC. I bet Penn State at a terrible number this week, and people are making a lot of this travel. Perhaps they're right. But Penn State, what I've been looking at more is actual on-field play, what they've done, snap counts. They've just been playing with their food so much. They take their starters out of games so early. It's super frustrating. I don't know if they'll be afforded that opportunity here. It's just like Kansas offense last year. They're slow and they're run heavy, but they're super explosive. Drew Aller's a little expensive for my liking at 7,800, considering Pribula is going to get like 10% of the snaps, and he's going to handle high leverage carry situations. But I wouldn't hate a contrarian Aller. He's just not going to project well given this game environment and their 2017 total. Nick Singleton should return here. He warmed up for the last game, but again, UCLA is so inept, they didn't even feel the need to give him a snap. This will be a 50-50 committee, but fortunately they run the ball so much that in the game previous where they were both healthy, we saw 18 carries for Allen, 16 for Singleton. People hate clicking on the timeshare backs. I'll certainly be doing that. We've seen USC just get the ball run straight down their throat in countless games this year. Tyler Warren, this dude's a stud, man. He's averaging 58 yards per game on just 5.8 targets. If they're ever forced into more pass-heavy situations, he's got a 27 or 26% target share. Last week, his routes were nearly 100%. This guy's another monster. Penn State, one of the tight end factories in the country, just doing it again, pushing out another absolute monster. The receiving core I can't tell what to make of last week's routes because obviously they played with their food. But Julian Fleming played more. He went up to 85% of the routes. That was by far a season high. Still only managed to get targeted 5 times. But that was with Wallace coming down, Omari Evans coming down, Clifford was about neutral. Did they just bench those guys and give Fleming more snaps because they didn't care? is a question to ask. Not that you're playing many Penn State pass catchers. It's kind of Tyler Warren or pass. Miller Moss is in a pretty untenable situation, and I feel bad because I love the skill position players. The offensive line is just outside the top 100 in pass blocking and run blocking. He's not super mobile, so you see negative 20 yards. I'm surprised it's not worse. But 40 attempts per game, the volume should be there most of the time. The efficiency has certainly declined with the pressure. The real problem you have here is this is a slower matchup for them. Penn State is a good defense, and they're just going to take the air out of the ball and control time of possession the best they can, which is going to hurt Moss's volume and efficiency. I'd rather play guys like Shug in the price range. They don't have a back they trust outside of Woody Marks. So this guy's a lock and load monster on the ground. He's a very involved pass game role too. He's averaging 4.8 targets per game over the last 4, 20 attempts in their last contest. He's still been semi-efficient, 94 rushing yards per game, averaging well over 100 all-purpose yards per game. You can play Woody Marks. Matchup is going to be tough for him here, but volume is certainly not difficult. USC doesn't have Lake McCree yet, but they did return Makai Lemon. I don't know how you say it. Excuse me, Makai. Someone in the comments can correct me, as usual. I welcome those, by the way. It helps me learn. I don't take offense to any corrections for names. I should be better. It's just hard to allocate your time sometimes. But anyway, with him back, he immediately jumped into a 49% route share that basically sapped everybody of the ceiling, especially the main guy at sap was Zachariah Branch. The two best route shares were Jacoby Lane, which is deserved after his performance. 72% of the routes last game, Kyron Hudson at 87, which was a bit of a surprise. They are using a little more 4 wide without McCree because their tight ends all stink, so that's worth noting. Even Deuce Robinson, 7 targets. He was still pretty limited route-wise, 56%. I wouldn't look too much into that. I think the main guys you look at are Lane and Hudson in this spot. All right, where are we now? Arizona BYU, last game on the main slate before we get to FanDuel. How are we doing on time? 15 minutes, not bad. Until I hit the hour mark. BYU is a 3-point favorite over Arizona, 49 total. It's not great. Arizona's taking a lot of money. I don't know why they have to go to Pro Bowl. They lost 2 starters in their secondary midweek. Teams have been able to play the same defense that you play on UCF, dedicate extra resources to Ted McMillan, and you win the game. Noah Fafita's been bad. I think part of this is they changed offenses, and they lost Jacob Cowing, and they don't have anyone else to complement McMillan. The offensive line sucks. They got a lot of injuries to this unit. They lost their left tackle preseason, but it is what it is. They're just not a competent offense right now, and Fafita's efficiency has declined, and we know he can't run. He needs 300 yards to give you a ceiling. Luckily, they're bringing his price down, so I'm more considering this than normal. The problem is the total is low, the pace is bad. Arizona's 87th, BYU is 119th. You're really relying on this pass rate being really high, and it has been at 60%. Ted McMillan, 8,500, you can play him. Whether you dedicate Reese's to him or not, it hasn't mattered. He's still averaging 132 yards. Now, he did have an absolute crazy game against an week 1 against, I think it was New Mexico. The FCS team actually did a great job against him, but the volume's there, 36.5% target share. If you want to play Ted as your stud, no problem. The backfield's become more of a mess. Kedrick Riscano is playing more at the expense of Quayle Conley, and I think this is pretty fine. Conley, I'm not sure how talented he is. He's an FCS transfer, went to San Jose, then came over here, followed his head coach. Riscano is a former 4-star. He was originally at Ole Miss, stuck in that logjam. Came here for more playing time. He's finally getting it, and he looks pretty good. So that's a problem. All the other receivers not named Tet are so damn bad that I don't think you can click any of their names. There's just better options in different offenses. Like I'm not playing Montana Lamonius Craig's 26 yards per game or Jeremiah Patterson's 11 yards per game. Kean Burnett is probably the best at 34 and pretty decent targets, but still, pass. Jake Retzlaff's too expensive, in my opinion, at 7,400. 156 rush yards per game is pretty good for him, and the efficiency's been there. But I think he's run kind of hot because this team has been so injured at running back that he's had pretty good design numbers. I don't think that's the case. They're getting, Hinckley Rapati did suit up in their last game, didn't get a snap, so maybe they didn't trust him yet. But Sion Moa is back from injury. LJ Martin's back from injury. Huanga's still there. Miles Davis is supposed to be back. Enoch Nawahine is still there. I don't know how this shakes out. My bet would be either on LJ Martin or on Enoch Nawahine, but I don't feel strongly about either one. I could see this being a nasty timeshare or going as far as them giving the carries to one guy. You just truly don't know with how the running back room has played out this year. It's been entirely injury driven. In the receiving room, they're down a receiver in this game. I can't remember who it is. Cody Epps. Okay, big loss. So not that we needed any consolidation route-wise at the top for Lassiter or Roberts. These guys are both studs, but we are going to get it. So you remove Epps. He is a top 3 receiver on the team. So I think now you see more routes go to Keelan Marion. I don't know about targets, but Marion already did see his routes jump to 80%. Keanu Hill still pretty limited as the tight end, and then you're not really seeing anyone else play meaningful routes. It's literally just Lassiter, Roberts, and now Keelan Marion that are in play for me at these prices. Roberts is a good buy low, and Lassiter had 13 targets in their last game, man. He's already jumped to the lead in targets and didn't even play in week 1. Lassiter's been a baller. This is an Eastern Michigan transfer. This kid's cool. Let's go to the FanDuel slate, at least the extra games for FanDuel. These are on DK night, and DK has a couple extras, one extra, I think. Florida and Tennessee, 14-point spread in favor of Tennessee, 56.5 total. Quietly, Graham Mertz has worked his way ahead of this timeshare. It was like an 80-20 split in pass attempts last game, still 50-50 in the ground, which means you probably still can't play either Mertz or Lagway, but I wouldn't be surprised if Mertz keeps working his way ahead. He's been awesome. Lagway's been good himself. Tennessee's weaknesses in their secondary, we finally saw it exploited. Basically, the recipe against Tennessee is, can your offensive line hold up against this pass rush long enough to give you time to throw over the top of them because they're banged up in the secondary. They lost Jordan Thomas at the beginning of the year. But Florida's a good offensive line. It's top 50 run blocking and pass blocking, and higher than that. I just don't have the numbers in front of me. Montrell Johnson in a committee. It looks like this is going to be a little bit narrowed. Treyon Webb is out, and I believe they're missing another guy, Katie Daniels. But Montrell still has not had the workload we've wanted, so it makes him pretty tough to play even at 6,500 on FanDuel. We're getting back Eugene Wilson. He's 6,500. I mean, I'll take shots on Eugene Wilson at this price, not knowing his playing time. But really what I think this does is bring off guys like Tank Hawkins. I could be wrong on this because it's not like Elijah Badger or Tremere DK have been super good, and Tank Hawkins is like a weird gadgety guy that give him carries. But I think most likely 3 wide receivers are going to be Badger, DK, and Wilson. My favorite flat out is just Wilson. He's the best player in this room on the team. Tight end is a mess. Tennessee, Nico Iamaleava, they're a really run-heavy team, and they don't trust him clearly. And I get it. He just ran straight out of bounds at the end of the game. He has a lot of turnover-worthy plays. He's a young player. Could get better for him. But not as involved in the run game as we would like. It's been better, actually, of late. He has 15 design carries over the last 2. But the offense is not as fast as they've been. They're 43rd. They were like top 5 in pace previously, and they have a 36% pass rate. So it's pretty tough to get to Iamaleava. Dylan Sampson, my goodness. This dude has a monster workload right now. He's averaging 118 yards per game, and he's held up. There's some better opponents. His route rate is rising. I mean, Sampson, he's expensive, but you could play him for sure. I'm shocked that we're seeing these receivers play. Allegedly, Brew McCoy and Squirrel White are going to play. The only question mark is Dante Thornton, which is fine. They did rotate receivers more, but now having a fully healthy Squirrel, Brew, and Brazel, it looks like Tennessee's going to be fully healthy. And I thought coming out of that game, there was a chance. There were early reports that some of these were going to be multi-week injuries. It appears they dodged a bullet. Tough to play them outside of just GPP sprinklings, but it's good that Iamaleava has his weapons. Ole Miss LSU. This game has a 3.5-point spread in favor of Ole Miss, a 62 total, which is awesome. Dart is very expensive on FanDuel, but he's been a cheat code. He's averaging 249.5 passing yards. A lot of that on the back of a very easy schedule, but he still runs 156. This team does not have Matt Jones in the backfield this week, and there's been talk from Lane Kiffin that Ulysses Bentley is going to play more. I basically am just projecting him to take the Matt Jones role. I don't know why you would take anything away from Parrish. He's been awesome, 95 yards per game. The only wrinkle with Ole Miss is that their goal line back is a defensive lineman, J.J. Pegues. He scored 2 touchdowns in their last game. So you just flat out don't have a goal line role. It caps the ceiling for these guys, certainly. They need to score from outside the goal line in order to pay off a true ceiling in this offense. And it's really just Parrish we're focusing on. Trey Harris is questionable. I think he goes. So that would make your main 3 wide receivers, Harris, Wells, and Watkins. Watkins finally returned to his full-time snap share in their last game. But they're not playing Caden Prescorn on 100% of the routes. He's at about 60, which leaves some left for Caden Lee, who's been taking up everything that's left. That's the order I prefer them. I'll still play Trey Harris as long as he suits up. Check this. And for what it's worth, if Harris is out, That would, I think, make it very clearly Wells, Lee, Watkins, and you probably see Prieskorn in a full-time role. That's how I would break it down if Harris is out, and that would vacate a ton of volume. Prieskorn would be in play. Lee would be super cheap on FanDuel and DraftKings, but he's a little more expensive there. LSU is not using their offense to their advantage, and it's cost them games. This team lost to USC. I mean, many problems with LSU. Their defense still is a horrifying secondary. They're 115th in coverage, 89th in pace. They're passing 59.5% of the time with one of the best offensive lines on paper in the country. Like, explain this to me like I'm 3. Nussmeier has been fine. I mean, the volume is there for Nussmeier. So it doesn't matter what I think of their offensive approach. It matters what they're doing for DFS. And they're throwing the absolute piss out of the ball. So you can play Nussmeier. You can stack him. He's actually very easy to do that with right now. The backfield, you might see Caden Durham take over this, which makes him an interesting flyer, really on both sides. But he got hurt immediately when he started balling out of control. But Josh Williams and Caleb Jackson have been so bad that I think they should give Durham, their freshman, a longer look. Keep your eye on that. Throw some darts if you feel so inclined. At receiver, ton of injuries. Kyle Parker is out for the year. We still haven't seen Chris Hilton. He's gotten to the point of I'll believe it when I see it. And CJ Daniels is hurt. He's played a ton, but he's been strictly a wind sprinter, so I'm not really looking too much into that. What we do know is Kyron Lacey's the 1, Aaron Anderson's the 2, Mason Anderson is your very reliable tight end. And then I think Xavier Thomas probably plays more as the wide receiver 3. I'm not 100% sure on that because we have seen guys like Shelton Sampson occasionally play more. And Brian Kelly continues to say he's going to use 12 personnel. He said this every week, and he's never done it. I just don't buy it at this point. Show me you're going to do something, and then we'll believe you, Brian Kelly. LSU stack certainly in play. Game of the week, Ohio State, Oregon, 3-point spread in favor of Ohio State, 54 total on the rise. Teams are average in pace. Both teams have about a 47.5% pass rate. Both teams, especially Ohio State, have been somewhat neutered to start the year. Both quarterbacks are not running as much as we saw them run at their previous schools. Both quarterbacks have been pretty efficient through the air. I think you can play them both in contrarian stacks. And I think they're priced just about efficiently. You get the slight price bump for Will Howard, likely is the favorite. You can stack him. This is the same thing we talked about with Texas. I don't think any of these receivers have been near their target ceiling or route ceiling in this offense because of who they've played. I legit think you might see Ibuka and Smith at 100% of their routes, and then Tate didn't play last week. He's been the very clear wide receiver 3. He could be at like 90%. These stacks are super live because they have the we played cupcakes all year discount. Same thing at running back. Judkins and Henderson, like, my goodness, are they cheap? There's some give and take here. Volume should be better, but now you have a tougher matchup. I'm not sure what to make of it. What I can tell you is I'll certainly be sprinkling any and all Ohio State starters. Same approach on Oregon for that matter. Dylan Gabriel, 71 rushing yards is pretty bad compared to where he was last year. Still 289 through the air. This is far and away his toughest matchup. Ohio State is the number 1 defense heading into the season, and they've lived up to it. You can't really poke holes. They've played a bunch of easy teams, but they've done what they were supposed to do. So I don't know. We'll definitely still throw some darts at Gabriel because of the explosiveness. He's easy to stack. It's Tez, it's Holden, it's Stewart, it's no one else. Ferguson's in a rotation. I'm more inclined to go to Stewart at a cheap price, but he still only had 3 targets in the last game. I've just been making mistakes probably all year and not been willing to give up my Evan Stewart bias. Perhaps I should just not play him anymore. Anyway, Jordan James is an awesome workload. I would love to see what this looks like if they're playing with a deficit. His route share has been awesome, so you can't really poke many holes in this, but not the best matchup. I think we can agree on that. 8,300 is still reasonable for him. Vanderbilt's Kentucky, poor total here, 44.5, 12-point spread. On Vandy, it's pretty easy. Do you play Pavi or not? He's expensive after his nuclear game against Bama, but he is awesome. He's handling like 43% of the design carries. It doesn't even factor in his scrambles. This guy's a monster. 80 yards per game almost on the ground. 194 through the air. Just the ceiling is very questionable. Now Kentucky is your opponent. It's not Bama, the explosive Bama offense. You have the snails paced, vanilla offense of Kentucky. There's better spots to play Vandy. Cedric Alexander did work his way ahead of A.J. Newberry and all the other dusty backs on this team. Now, it was like the perfect game script for him to just get an elevated workload, but I'm never really going to be buying into that with Vandy playing slow. The receiving game at Stowers are pass. They just don't use enough guys, and the passing game is not voluminous enough. Skinner and Sherrill are the other two to mention, but that's about it. Kentucky, you can't play signal caller. They're using more situational Gavin Wimsatt than I'd like. He handles a lot of very clear rushing attempts, especially around the goal line. He had the one he fumbled and it popped into the tight end's hands and they scored. He got very lucky, but they're going to use him in weird spots. This is kind of like Drew Aller. I mean, Vandegrift does not have the full role. No Chip Tranum again, so presumably Demi Sumo-Krongbach should handle most of it, but man, not only did Wimsatt come in for a lot of carries, but they had 15 designed carries for Brock Vandegrift, and Jamarian Wilcox has handled at least 7 in 3 straight. Can't play Kentucky back. And then the receiving room has been weird. They've used Fred Farrier at the expense of Barry Brown and Jamori Macklin. The only guy who's out there almost every play is Dane Key. I mean, he's expensive too. This is a mess. Iowa State, West Virginia, 53 total, 3-point spread in favor of the road team. Iowa State traveling to Morgantown. They've been slow, 121st in seconds per play, 42nd in pass rate. They've got a lot of cracks I want to exploit, and I'll do just that in this game betting-wise. But for DFS, we should see them pass more. We saw them pass a ton last year. They were near 50%. So I think Becht has some untapped potential through the air, but he doesn't run. And I mean, on the other side, West Virginia's secondary is awful. They're like a bottom 5 unit in the country, efficiency-wise. So there's crazier things than Becht, contrarian QB stacks, but I don't love it. The backfield, a huge disappointment to me. I thought Abu Sama was poised for just a monster workload. He's third in a committee now behind Carson Hansen and Jalen Jackson. The receiving game, these guys are too cheap. Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel, perennially underrated, weekly too cheap on the sites. I mean, just play these guys until they stop you price-wise. Garrett Green, very, very affordable on FanDuel. Good dual threat. Didn't even play the whole game last week because of injury. Still got there. I mean, Garrett Green's live. It's a 50-50 committee between Jaheim White and Donaldson. This is a tougher matchup with the lower total, so it's tough to click their names. And then in the receiving game, they have consolidated a little bit. Hudson Clement had a monster route share as I scroll all the way down to West Virginia. 88%. Traylon Ray, 68%. Cole Taylor, 92%. Then they rotated the rest of their guys. Gallagher was at 44. He was the next best. Bray was around 30. But I think we can finally start playing Clement with some more confidence, at least more than previously. He would be the one I go to. Ray would be second. But on FanDuel, there's a pretty clear preference to Clement. And final game, we have Syracuse taking on NC State. 3-point spread in favor of Cuse, 52 total. Cuse is fast with a 57% pace, or 57th ranked pace. They're a 64.5% passing team, pure air raid. NC State's playing really slow now that they're on their backup quarterback, and McCall got decapitated again. McCord is very expensive for a guy who can't run on FanDuel specifically, especially with a total that's depleted after NC State's approach this year. He's going to be contrarian. You could use him, I guess, but I still don't love it. 48 attempts per game is pretty good. LaQuinta Allen is by far the lead back here. No Will Nixon. They've given just all the Will Nixon carries right to Yassine Willis is what it is. LaQuinta has a great pass catching role, so he's still live. He's averaging 7 targets per game. A running back. That is absolutely bananas. On DraftKings, it's a great play. The receiving room has been very consolidated of late. It's Trevor Pena. They finally gave Jackson Meeks that role I wanted them to. He was above 70% of the routes last game. He now has 22 targets in 2 straight games. And then, of course, Gadsden's your old reliable. They also benched Umari Hatcher for Daryl Gill, so that's noteworthy too. Hatcher was way down in his routes, which we predicted. Daryl Gill, we did not project to go super far up, but he did. What we did have was Jackson Meeks seeing a larger role because he's been so good. Those are the players you want to get to. Meeks is the best price adjusted. CJ Bailey, he's a freshman, no fault of his own. He's been thrust into an untenable situation. 42 rush yards, not going to get it done. 185 through the year, not going to get it done. Jordan Waters has been so inefficient that they're now using Kendrick Raphael more. It's a 50-50 committee, not going to get it done. Can you use Casey Conception, Kevin Conception? Yeah, I think you can. As a contrarian piece. He's not coming off the field very often. He handles carries. He's a 32% target share. He would be the contrarian guy to get to. All right, I failed. I went 4 minutes over. I realized this lighting just must be a time of day thing. I don't know. But thank you guys for watching. If you have a comment, please leave it below. A question, reach out to me on Twitter at @Matt_Gajewski. If you want access to these tools, link below. We'll be back tomorrow live before lock for our more hashed out thoughts. Until then, good luck, and we'll see you later.